where he lives with his wife Eileen, and she is a high school English teacher. Fun fact.
Dr. Coates has authored and co-authored 18 nonfiction works to date. He has 2 forthcoming nonfiction works, including Volume 2 of Pursuing the Progressive Case of Observing Obama in Real Time, and The Flawed Capitalism, the Anglo-American Condition and its Resolution, which is expected in June of 2018. He has also written one fiction book entitled The Thighs of Rose Tudor Crump, which hit shelves in October of 2010. His forthcoming novel is called Lying Close to the Sky. In addition to his academic pursuits, Dr. Coates enjoys cricket, and he has generously offered to explain the basics of the game to anyone interested. Please join us in welcoming Dr. David Coates.
Yes, I've forgotten about thighs. It's not as rude a novel, by the way, as it sounds. It's actually an everyday story of university folk. So it has to have thighs in the title somewhere. It's a great privilege to be with you all this afternoon, and very nice to have colleagues in Berlin. We think from here, we may be wrong, we think from here that after 5 o'clock and you're all drinking wine, if that's the case, we're all rather bitterly angry about that. No, we have to wait a lot longer. People, I want to talk to you about Brexit today. It's hugely in the news, of course, and one of the things, if we'd been in our normal room, I might have done here, but actually have distributed to you the latest range of newspaper articles from the UK. Feel slightly nervous about doing that, but when we actually are transatlantic in our conversation this lunchtime. And also, of course, since there will be many British students possibly in the audience in Berlin, there's going to be lots of feedback. I think will be better informed than I can be. But what I wanted to say as we start is one of the reasons we have to get our head around this whole topic is that it now sits at a crossroads of a really very striking set of developments. I mean, we are reeling here, are we not, from the election of Donald Trump. And what that signifies for the United States and its global role. We're sensitive to the fact, I think, that in Western Europe as a whole, certainly in France, the rise of the extreme right is also a significant element. And here we have Brexit as a first time we run at this thing from the UK. So what this thing matters in itself, but it also matters in a bigger context, suddenly becomes deeply significant, I think, on the global stage. And it's also a story that's very much in process, isn't it? So what I thought I could do today was to bring certain things to the table, some of which some of you will know, some of which perhaps you won't, and then we'll put it together, and then I think the Q&A will be the most productive of the session, part of the session. I want to talk to you a bit about the context of the vote for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. I want to talk a bit about the vote itself. I want to say a little bit about the options and the ways forward which are before us now and some of the effects. But throughout that whole thing, I also want to, you'll forgive me, keep drawing parallels to developments here in the United States in relation to the Republican nominee and now President-elect. The context, I think, which will be familiar to some of the people in this audience, that's not brothers. The context is that the United Kingdom has never been a very enthusiastic participant in the European project. Particularly its political class, which was deeply reluctant, I think, at times to be drawn into it at all. And that speaks to something which is there in the background behind all of this, which is that the United Kingdom was in the 19th century, remained into the 20th century, a major imperial power in its own right. And its global role in the imperialism of its dominant classes is an important contextual variable here to which we need to remain sensitive. It joined the European Union very late. It was blocked initially by de Gaulle when the first time it tried. It perpetually negotiated opt-outs for itself during the period of membership. It's not a member of the Eurozone. It never came into the Eurozone itself. And it was always, in fact, trying, particularly the political class, were trying to maintain a role as a bridge between the United States and Western Europe. Always, in that sense, offshore. And what's interesting about that particular orientation to the European Union long before Brexit was that, in fact, the alliance the relationship to the emerging European Union in terms of British politics shifted. Initially, the enthusiasm was on the right. From the Conservative Party, you saw the European Union as a common market, prepared to live with some of the welfare rights associated with it, but were particularly unenthusiastic about any move of that common market into a political union, and became increasingly Eurosceptic over time. Whereas it was the Labour Party and the left in Britain as a whole who initially objected to be a member of the European Union because it was a capitalist club. I always seem to get myself entirely on the wrong side of history, so maybe everything I'm saying today is complete nonsense, okay? But of course I voted against the European Union in 1975, and thank God we lost, you know. Because the European Union became increasingly important to the left in Britain as a source of support for welfare provision, and was a viable example of the way kind of welfare capitalism that the left wanted to create. And the weaker old Labour became, the more important the European Union became to the Labour Party. New Labour was itself a fairly enthusiastic EU member, though it was always in a rather instrumental fashion. One of the things that we have seen in the Brexit thing is a residue of that 1975 antipathy to the European Union reappear in the form of very weak political leadership from Jeremy Corbyn and the old Labour left, now leading the Labour Party. They left this thing largely alone. They're very unenthusiastic about supporting the Remain side, and they played a really, I think, disastrous role in the actual campaign itself. We might talk about that later. But what also goes with that, as a contextual variable, I think, is this: that means that there's a very low level of public support for EU membership in the United Kingdom. I think it was residually there. I'm very conscious of the fact that we're now aware that we're structured by generation and by class. We'll come back to that. I'm speaking, my own personal solution to how to overthrow capitalism was to outbreed it. So I have 6 children, and they all have many children of their own. That was our solution. We take the castle by storm. Eventually, they're all passionate Europeans, like I am. So I mean, the assumption was everybody was, because we're just typical. Well, we're clearly not typical in that sense. There was a low level of enthusiasm for the project, and of course, inside the ranks of the Conservative Party, particularly its membership base, you began to see the build-up of a strong Eurosceptical presence, which comes out as an independent party in the party UK from 1993. So the background is of a rather unenthusiastic relationship with the European Union, but nonetheless, the United Kingdom had been inside Europe since 1973, over 40 years. It's just part of the wallpaper. And so it was rather, I think, very unexpected when the vote came in June the way it did. That's one thing we need to talk about, I think, the differential bases of support and lack of enthusiasm and lack of knowledge about the European Union. One of the things we did yesterday with my people back in Wake Forest, we were talking about the difference. We were looking at the Eurozone crisis and the financial crisis of 2018 here in the US, rather than the relationship between the two. And one of the things somebody said from the floor was, if you were in the European Union now, you asked people in Europe who was the name of the incoming American president, but presumably most everybody would know. But if you ask them who was the president of the European Union, probably people wouldn't know at all. I mean, there's a sense of invisibility about the European Union and its coordinating institutions, which leaves it very vulnerable to this kind of movement against it. Now, that by way of context. Let me say to people secondly, but again, apologies, people know some part of this. Of course, when we go back to look at this thing, I mean, those of us who have a penchant, like I do, for structural analysis, have a problem. But this is a cock-up. I mean, this is simply, a mistake that was made, a series of accidents that in fact produced this result, I think. David Cameron was clearly under pressure inside his own party to hold a referendum of some kind. I mean, there was a vote of over 80 Conservative MPs in 2011 for this referendum to be eventually held, and so the deal was that he would renegotiate the terms of the settlement with the European Union, would come back with that renegotiation, they'd have a referendum, and on the premise that the referendum would then vote for remaining in the European Union. My sense of it, watching from afar, that people may know differently if we were closer, was that the the working premise in this whole exercise was that this referendum would not occur because the Conservatives would remain in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and the price of that coalition would be that the referendum would be put up, and David Cameron would be able to manage that because he would have renegotiated some special terms. Several things happened, you know. The Conservatives won a majority in 2015. The Liberal Democrats were electorally annihilated, so they went out of the equation. The negotiations, when they came, the renegotiations were extremely modest and did not gather any kind of traction. There was no way in which they could say that very substantial gains have been made. And then there was this other extraordinary ingredient, well, there are two, that we might talk about in more detail later. I mean, one is that the status of a referendum in a parliamentary system is not clear. And certainly, people are not trained in how to vote in referenda in quite the same way they are here. When you cut, and we've just been through a vote, obviously, here, one of the reasons it takes such a staggering long time, and the lines are long, is an American ballot is a very, very long affair, and it has 2 or 3 bond things at the bottom of it, so you end up, when you go into the voting booth, you know you're actually involved in some kind of selection of candidates and then selection of issues. But in a referenda, and what happens, of course, we've seen it with Hillary Clinton's experience a week last Tuesday, is that votes can be wasted significantly in single-member constituencies because people vote, that vote accumulates in one place, you only need to win by a majority of 1 in that constituency, and then the rest of the votes are the way don't figure. So that many people actually, knowing that they're in a very secure state, feel they can make a protest vote or not vote, and I mean, the voting actually becomes rather light in that sense. But here in a referendum, every vote counts, and so everything gets stacked up, and even votes which are small for one side of the referenda in an area which is very much for the other actually ends up being, of course, deeply significant. So I think there was a sense in which, and we must talk to people in Berlin perhaps who actually did the vote. I didn't personally vote in it because I feel living in America I had no right to. But you know, were people really thinking that this thing was so much on the knife edge that their vote was significant, or whether they could actually, in that sense, relax? My sense is that people went to bed thinking one thing. In fact, Nigel Farage went to bed thinking one thing and got up finding in the morning that it had gone the other way, and people were very surprised by that. It tells you something, I think, about the relationship between referenda and first-past the post-election systems. And of course, it now leaves into the middle this whole question of the status of this referenda as a specification of government policy, which is certainly being fought out before the courts. Let me just go sideways to say something I would have said to you at the beginning, having distributed it in the newspapers. There are various things in the bits of the British press I see on a daily basis, of which we would do well to be conscious as I speak on this morning. One is that this whole exercise is now under challenge in the courts. And the Supreme Court has actually argued, has it not, that in fact Parliament has to take a vote. Now what the role of the Supreme Court is in a parliamentary system, that's something else we ought to talk about, it's all new territory. The fact that New Labour's solution to these internal tensions in the United Kingdom was actually to devolve government down to different regional assemblies with considerable potency, means that some of those regional governments, particularly Scottish of course, but also Northern Irish and now apparently the Welsh, all want to get into the action before the Supreme Court. So we just don't know what's going to come out of the Supreme Court. I mean, I think formally and technically, the referendum is simply advisory. The government could ignore it, but politically, of course, it will feel it's actually binding. So that was one of the things I was going to have you look at. There's piles and piles of newspaper cuttings about that. The other thing that's certainly around in the recent press in the UK is the extent to which, for some people at least, this is the last or the latest installment of a long struggle to stop being European. So that there's a very big piece in the Guardian, I think, or the FT yesterday, about people who want to get out of the metric system and go back to using inches and feet and so on, you know. Well, my view of that is I wish they would, because I can't do, I just can't do meters, it's just me, it's stupid. But of course it would be a terribly retrograde step. And all these things in the end, of course, way back in time, are the fault of the French. And you have to always understand that when you're understanding European Union. Everything is the fault of the French. If Napoleon hadn't chickened out in 1805, we could be metric, we'd drive on the right side of the road, and in fact the railway lines would be wider. So in the end, it's all the French. And my other anti-French thesis, let me tell you, is of course that if the French Communist Party had not chickened out in 1944, Britain would have got the bulk of martial aid and we would be a lot better off. So there are various kind of elements we can talk about later if you want, if this gets too serious. The other thing, though, to say about the misjudgment in relation to the referendum is that the campaign itself took on a life of its own, which was, I think, not expected. And we've just lived through an equivalent kind of exercise here in the United States. What seems to have happened is that beneath the surface issues, bigger structural trends were operating that the political class, and indeed most of the political commentators, including myself, I think, did not pick up with anything like the significance, the force that they should. One clearly is this whole business of a section of the working class in England feeling they have been left behind. So one of the structural things in here is in fact the separation between New Labour on the one side and its traditional working class base on the other, which is paralleled exactly, I think, by the separation between the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party and the significant section of the white working class in the United States. That gap has opened up, right? It's opened up in large part, I think, because of the capitulation of the centre-left under Clinton and Blair to the neoliberal orthodoxies which had come into play through Reagan and through Thatcher. There's a sense in which, if you go back and look now, the first response of Reagan and Thatcher is, I hope not a replay of what we're going to do now. The first response to Reagan and Thatcher was to go to the left massively. I hope we do that again. But then they abandoned that very quickly. So there was the alternative economic strategy in the UK, there was the industrial policy in the Democratic Party here in the United States. And then very quickly, Clinton's new democratic centrist triangulation and Tony Blair's soft Thatcherism came into play. So the Labour Party as a political vehicle, the Democratic Party as a political vehicle, comes into this referendum campaign with a weakening relationship with each section of its working class base, and that section of working class base is looking for some reason to explain to itself why, in all the prosperity that had come in the 90s and the 2000s, they themselves had not experienced it. I think it's very, again, speaking to our German colleagues, it's very visible here in a state like North Carolina. You simply drive west whenever the fires have stopped and you see it. Chunks of, you drive to West Virginia, go up the back of West Pennsylvania and so on, and it's totally Trump and Spence land because in those small villages and towns, jobs are dried up, living standards are frozen and so on. Well, apparently that's also true in large chunks of the United Kingdom. I mean, my own personal experience has always been with Lincolnshire and Holland. Yes, that is right. I mean, that's exactly where prosperity seems to have dissipated. So one of the structural things underneath the campaign and the potency of the impact of the Leave campaign is that people were disillusioned with a section of the political class in London on the centre-left that in some sense had let them down. We have said in stuff on Trump, I think, of this parallel, this image will carry meaning for everybody in Berlin. But this is really Hail Mary politics. You know what happens in a tight football game in the United States. The quarterback's got about 30 seconds to save his career, so he just chucks the ball up and hopes to God somebody catches it. It doesn't matter where it comes down, just throw the damn thing. Well, there's a sense in which that is an element, I think, of the Leave campaign, you know, that things are bad, so let's leave and then everything will be better. It's certainly been a feature of the Trump campaign here and so on. That's one of the underlying things, I think, which we need to keep with us as we talk later on. The other thing that we need to keep with us is that there are twin-layered, maybe more than twin, but multi-layered problems with labour movement inside the European Union. And again, there are American parallels with Trump and the building of the wall. When I go back to the United Kingdom and through the coalition years, my sense is that there was a shift in demographics around you. And there were a lot of Eastern European workers appearing at crucial points, particularly on service stations and so on. And this is a kind of physical manifestation of the Polish plumber issue. And there was a sense of people coming from, as the European Union expanded to become a much more uneven economic bloc, with much uneven economic development within it, labour mobility for economic migration began to be a more significant factor than it had been before. There was already some sense of that being a problem. You heard rumblings about Polish plumbers and what difficult it was in London and so on. But then when you overlay that with a massive Middle Eastern crisis caused by American destabilization of the area with the help of Tony Blair over a 10 or 15 year period, then that comes in to sweep across the whole of the European Union. And therefore it was possible for people like a man like Nigel Farage to start talking about floods of immigrants coming in, picking up on the Polish thing, but actually showing images of people fleeing out of the Middle East and so on. And I think the artificiality of that particular connection was not sufficiently challenged by the Remain people at the time. One final thing on the campaign, again, people who were closer to it will be able to talk more about this later, but I'm struck by it. It was a really nasty campaign. It was full of lies, incredible lies. People walking around lying all the time, particularly what we were going to do in National Health Service and so on. I was shocked, you know, there's gambling going on in this establishment, isn't that movie, right? You know, we were just terribly shocked. And there was a definite antipathy to experts. Again, if we've been in the other room, I brought with me, this is a pile, some of you don't know whether you can see it on the video, probably not, there's a pile of reports there. It's this thing. That were put out in the 2 months before their vote, from every single kind of think tank, and twice from the Treasury, pointing out that if the people voted to come out of the European Union, the economic consequences would be very, very severe, locking the UK onto a lower economic trajectory. Those reports were regularly discussed in the run-up to the vote, and to the point at which I'm sure people know, Michael Gove actually, for other Remaining people, said, well, we were fed up with experts. We're fed up with it. Experts don't know anything. And we moved into this remarkable phase, which we've just lived through here, on the grand scale, of post-factual politics, where if things are repeated often enough, they become true by repetition. So let me tell you, I'm a genius, I'm a genius, I'm a genius. So are you ready? So it becomes true by repetition, right? I'm working on it. I'll repeat it 2 more times. But I mean, that is the kind of level at which it's at. And the big problem, as we all know, is facts are stubborn things, as John Adams once said. You know, that's stubborn things. The reality is going to come back and bite everybody in the back. But unfortunately, bite it in time. And in fact, of course, it might invoke an even more right-wing response, unless in fact when it does, when the gap between promise and performance comes into view, it's handled properly from the left. So, the campaign had one other parallel to what's going on around us now, which I pick my words with care. It's a legitimate area of political science to examine the quality of the political class. And there is a structural tension, I think, in democracies between the skill set you need to win elections and the skill set you need to govern when you have won elections. Those don't sit easily together. We have had idiots before, and we will have idiots again. But my God, we've got them now. I mean, the quality of these people is staggeringly low. When Boris Johnson was in danger of becoming Prime Minister, it moved the needle of the amazing to a new level. And at this point now, let me say to people in Berlin, you don't need to worry that Donald Trump will build a wall. He doesn't need to build a wall. Nobody's going to cross the Mexican border and they might fall into Trump now. The only wall that needs to be built now is Canada. Because people are going to Canada at such rates of knots, so the whole continent is tipping over and people get the hell out of here, you know. I mean, there's a sense in which the quality of the people coming through to win this thing, Liam Fox, David Davis and Boris Johnson are in charge of Brexit, and we're going to get Rudy Giuliani, Sarah Palin, who knows who's going to come out of the woodwork here. I mean, so I think we are a serious, serious issue left behind for us about the quality of our leadership for all. All right, now, several other things to put on the table for everybody. people know, I think, that the Leave campaign won just narrowly, 51.9 million. The Remain people, 48.1. Perhaps people don't know why I keep this parallel, and of course Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by over 1 million here in the United States. So, but the Remain people did win. And as far as I know, there was no Russian interference in the vote count in this particular case. There might well have been in our own. But what's interesting is that there was a significant difference, as people know, between the vote in Scotland, and indeed in Northern Ireland, and the vote in England and Wales. And that puts onto the agenda something that we'll come to at the end, about whether one consequence of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union will be that the United Kingdom itself breaks off. Again, there are very powerful forces pulling the thing together, but I'm sure people are aware that countries that are genuinely united have no need to put the word in their tablet. And the United Kingdom has always been a union of 4 separate places. The United States, of course, is simply the Civil War on hold right now in this fight. Here in the Old South, you know, I've heard very powerful arguments lately, hey, Texas should secede from the Union, please, and the California might. I mean, so you know, these unions don't hold together that easily, but the United States, of course, will. The United Kingdom has a serious problem with Scotland now. And if the United Kingdom does end up fracturing, then the units that are left behind will be weaker economically in significant ways. So there's a very strong argument for trying very well to hang together rather than hanging separately. But it is very significant that in fact the regional variation was so sharp. What's striking about the data sets that people worked on them here more closely than I have, but I expected a gender split, and there wasn't a gender split in the vote on Brexit, and there is a gender split in the vote on Trump, but there isn't a gender split. It's pretty much the same. Slight gender split, but nothing significant. The two big splits, everybody knows about it. One is age. I mean, I think Brexit, and I hope Donald Trump for Brexit, is the last throw of the baby boomers. With the exception of all the baby boomers in the room here, I think they should be cold. Because their contribution to the future is really awful. You know? We let Thatcher get in, we let neoliberalism set on everybody, we've hung on to our pensions, comrades, so we are not going to go down. But the problem you find in the baby boomers, you know, is your children never leave home. They just move in, come stay with you forever, and so on. So there is a very powerful generation issue here. 73% of all the 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK voted to remain. 73%. 60% of those people over 65 voted to leave. And far more people in that older age bracket voted proportionately than people in the younger one. And I think if in fact there was ever a moment where the thing could be redone, I think buyer's remorse was setting in already, I'm sure those numbers would shift and the thing might tip the other way. So that's one of the things that's quite striking about it. And the other parallels, of course, what we're going through here too, is that there's a very close relationship between education, class, and voting. Really, people with degrees voted to remain, people without degrees much more likely to vote to leave, and that's exactly the situation we're seeing here. There's a sense in which that is not the explanation, it's simply the surface of the fact that inside these two economies and societies over the last 25 years of neoliberal dominance, certain sections of the population have been to effectively marginalised. Income inequality has widened, job security has diminished in certain areas, and so on. And this was a moment for that to manifest itself in the appearance of a Brexit vote amongst working class Brits to a much greater degree amongst middle class Brits. What is also clear, I think, again, forgive me, those of you who are not preoccupied with Trump as I am right now, is that the thing in the United States about class is absolutely overlaid by race. So that you cannot very easily separate out class dimensions. So you have to talk about the white working class as a thing in the black working class, and you don't call the black working class a working class at all. It's a minority community and so on. The language even gets in the way of class analysis. in the British case, of course, with a much higher indigenous population, class characteristics are strong. You can see a working class vote. But of course, in ethnic terms, if you look, it is, again, the white working class in Britain who voted to leave. 60% of Asian voters voted to remain, 74% of black voters, 70% of Muslims, and so on. So even there are echoes of what we're living through here in the Brexit vote. So the Brexit vote was very much a working class pushback, I think, against the political elites in London. And there again, there are parallels with the antipathy to the elites in Washington that we need to bear in mind. So the vote is taken. It was a harbinger of things to come. The big issue now is whether it's a harbinger of the arrival of Le Pen in the presidency in France. Are we into a sequence that's going to keep rolling, or do we stop it? How the hell do we stop it, right? That's the issue. But for the Brits, the issue is how do you exit? What sort of exit are you actually engaged in? And anybody who's short of a PhD, come on board, because this is a huge area now of research and of concern. Again, we apologize to people in Berlin. Everybody in the room has in front of them 2 pieces of paper. That one of them is simply a chart of the different ways in which the UK might pull out of the European Union, going from a soft to a hard. In other words, retaining full EU membership at one end, just ending up in the WTO at the other. We will talk about those in a minute. We've got to talk about those. But the other document that you have in front of you is this morning, which people in Berlin may have seen, is an extract from this morning's London Financial Times, in which the German finance minister has given a lengthy interview to the Financial Times, which is a very good way of speaking to the British political class as a whole, and pointing out no easy options, no half deals, everything's got to be done, or nothing's got to be done. And what the journalists have already said, and Germany has been, as it were, in one sense, the softer of the European partners in relation to the exit. But under French pressure, the French are really saying, come on, we need London, slightly action that London has, and if we don't take a hard line with them, everybody else is going to jump ship, and I've got Le Pen to deal with, so come on, let's get tough about this. The Germans have been softer, but this morning not. So I think what's quite clear is that there are various choices before the British about how they extricate themselves from the European Union, but each one of them comes with a price. That's number one. And number two, they won't decide in the end. The European Union will decide in the end what the deal is that the British are able to strike. I mean, one of the gems of the early posturing was, what language will these negotiations be held in? Why should they be in English? If you leave it, they should be in French. My French is terrible. I mean, you could get anything past the British political class in a foreign language. So, I mean, it's quite a sensible strategy, I think, there, tucked away somewhere. But no doubt they'll have translators. I mean, one of the problems they've got is they don't actually have the negotiating teams and the skill sets of negotiating teams they need to take this business on anyway. But nonetheless, there are several choices. One thing they can do on the soft end, as it were, the soft Brexit, is to have continued membership through the European Economic Area, the EEA. But for that, to have that sort of relationship with the European Union, you have to accept all 4 freedoms, including freedom of movement. And it's quite clear that it's an immigration issue, not a trade issue, which is the thing that's driving this politically inside the Conservative Party right now. And it would be quite an achievement to end up having the same relationship with the European Union you started with, but no access to the decision-making powers that made the rules in the first place. I mean, I always argue that the British now are post-imperial in a way that the Americans are not. So we are, I try and explain to my students that when we have the Eurovision Song Contest, people already shut up, I've lost it already. With the Eurovision Song Contest, I mean, every country has one song, right? And the British get 0 point, right? we all cheer, you know, I mean, we are definitely post-imperial. We understand self-deprecation is a British skill. America doesn't. But it would be insane to renegotiate yourself into a position where you have to do all the things you had to do before but have no leverage on it anyway. And I think that's where the softest of them would actually not work. The hardest of them, of course, is you get no deal or you're just in the WTO and you've got then to negotiate trade deals with everybody and there'll be tariffs. And that's the other end of the spectrum that they've got to operate between. And in the process, they've got to deal with the thing in the middle, which is all the residual responsibilities and that they actually will actually carry, both to Europe and to their own people, as they pull away. I can do this more sensibly anecdotally, I think. One of the things that seems to have happened is that the areas that depend most on European grants were likely to be one of the strongest areas for leave, because people didn't realize just how much of European money was actually feeding into their local economy. This was certainly true for Wales. I might have a, as I say, lots of children. One of them, my colleague Tom, is a brilliant mathematician, and he just had his inaugural lecture with a professor of math at the Imperial College in London. So we went over to see. And he turned it, I'm very proud of him, he turned it into a Brexit lecture. I mean, it was partly, he was talking to mathematicians about maths. I have no idea what that was about at all. But, you know, but he then put up on the screen the list of the team that had produced the maths of which he was a head, and they have a big European Union grant. And then he turned the lights off behind every one of the people who would have to leave when Brexit was on. And there were 3 people left in a team of 15. So he's saying, you know, that at the level of the intellectual networks that sustain great scholarship and research in British universities, the damage is already beginning to be done. His wife actually was an architect, and Californian trained architect in earthquake protection, which is not a huge demand in London, I mentioned. But they have a team working in Afghanistan, and again, mainly European nationals, mainly having to be laid off or beginning to think that they will leave. So that the actual costs of this exercise are already creeping in. And the other side of the costs, talking to Tom, is that he thinks his European grant is safe. But if it isn't, the Treasury have already committed to picking up the tab. So there's going to be an enormous increase in government spending. The autumn statement, I think, it comes next week, I think, from Hammond, the new Chancellor. They had to change their finance minister because clearly austerity is out. You cannot run. They've got to run budget deficits again on a large scale because they've got somehow to cushion the cost. So what we've got what we've got in play now is a huge amount of uncertainty of how to pick your way between unpalatable options, no one of which makes any real kind of sense, all of which comes with enormous costs. And the thing that also compounds that, as people know, are the rules around Article 50. I mean, once you trigger this thing, you've 2 years and you're gone. So whether you trigger it, how you trigger it, can you postpone it or not, that becomes an issue for the British, but it also becomes an issue for the rest of the European Union, because the rest of the European Union needs this thing sorted out as quickly as possible. The British need to soften it as long as they can. The two things are significantly in tension. Now, I brought in with me, I have it here, I think, that's in one of my other part, bear with me 1 second, a list of the, a list of the deals that will have to be struck to get the British out of the European Union. And there are probably 6 big ones which have to be negotiated. One is clearly the divorce settlement itself. Then there's the trade, some kind of trade agreement like the Canadians have just negotiated. There's an interim deal that will have to be worked out. There's a deal about residual responsibilities into which the thing is to be set. There's a deal to be struck about how far international trade rules apply, even when you're not in, and so on. The document is long, and the thing that produced it is even longer, right? All we know is that this is going to be a 5, 10, 15-year process, and the costs of that process very substantial indeed. I'd like to just let the Q&A be our major part of what we do this to, particularly our colleagues in Berlin. But let me just close the opening remarks with two sets of observations about consequences. That pile of reports on what was going to happen if the vote became to leave the European Union, all those reports which were all written by people who thought we should stay, there was just one report, I think, from all the think tanks arguing that in fact it was a good idea to leave, the economy would pick up. They were all accused at the time of fear-mongering and exaggerating. And in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, that criticism looks real. But the British do have a parallel, a historical parallel on which to draw. Again, apologies to the people in Berlin. I mean, the phony war between Britain and Germany in 1940, there was a kind of a lull for 3 or 4 months, and people are saying this is very much a kind of phony war period, people are feeling their way forward. For the minute, the economic impact has been more muted than was thought. But two things have already happened that suggest that there's a lot worse to come. To begin with, the pound collapsed, as you know, dramatically collapsed. So the first thing that British tourists discovered was that Florida was an expensive place, which is another reason for not going. So anyway, keep on saying. Walt Disney forever. Our counter-argument inside that normally is, well, with a lower currency you can export more. Your manufacturing base is actually able to become much more export sensitive. But to do that, you have to have an export base. You have to have a manufacturing base. And the problem with the British economy was it's already on that incredibly low productivity trajectory that's holding it back. And you drop a cheap currency on that, and all you get is internal inflation because imports are more expensive. So I think we're already seeing that the financial interaction between Britain and the rest of the international capitalist world is affected by Brexit. And there's talk of 80 to 100,000 redundancies in the City of London over the next 2 years that people are worried about. Okay? Because it's very hard to see why London should have any claim on the loyalty of the international financial community if London itself is not inside the European Union, Britain is not inside the European Union. So there are various alternatives, aren't there? One is that London could secede from the United Kingdom and reposition itself in Calais. That seems to be an extremely good idea. Or everybody will go and live in Dublin, won't they? Every bank will move to Dublin. Or if the Scots break away to Edinburgh. Well, you know, Dublin's a lovely city, but the weather's terrible. And so I think we need to keep... The City of London is a vital component element in an over-financialised economy. And if you pull it away, oh, hell, this model is not very good. So I think the long-term effect of this is going to be enormous. The Tories, of course, have managed to persuade Nissan to commit to staying in the UK and use, as Margaret Thatcher built, of course, the UK economy in relation to the European Union was very much a screwdriver economy. You built it here to sell it there because they were more prosperous and our labour costs were lower. Well, the Tories have been promising the Nissan board that they will negotiate a free trade deal. But they're not in a position to deliver that, but at least they've promised that they'll try. So I think the long-term economic costs of this are going to be enormous. And they'll be negative. I can't see a positive consequence for the United Kingdom economy coming out of this. And I also can't see how a 5, 10 or 15-year period of separation can do other than make those economic processes even more difficult. So when I was introduced, people say I was writing this book on flawed capitalism. I have been doing this for quite a while. I have to keep stopping because I cry so much on the page and get to stay wet. So, I mean, it's a miserable story on both sides of the Atlantic, what's happening to people at the bottom end of the class structure in both cases, right? It is awful. But this is going to make it worse. So any notion of pulling out of the European Union is going to turn Hull and Lincolnshire into the new Silicon Valley of Western Europe is just a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. I mean, and so, but you know, I'm so good at predicting. You'll see Lincolnshire turn into the Silicon Valley within about 3 weeks. But it does look to me like that the economic consequences are really high. But there is now a final thing to say: this My friend Andrew Gamble just produced a marvellous piece on the Sperry blog site. That's the SPERI, Sheffield Political Economy Research Institute blog site, which I strongly recommend to everybody. It is, I think, the finest political economy blog site and centre working currently in the UK. Pointing out that actually we might be at an even more difficult moment, because the arrival of the Trump administration in Washington, and with their attack on trade, as well as the pulling out of the UK from the European Union because of primarily of immigration, is doing two things which we need to bear in mind. One is it is weakening the EU, and I'm sure the European Union and the key chancelleries within it are sensitive to this and know that what has to be defended here and held is a strong European Union without the UK. And if that means being tough on the UK, then all so good, right? That thing has to happen. Because the European Union is still the best thing that's happened in the Western world since 1945. And if anybody thinks then that it isn't, see me afterwards behind the bike sheds. You know, I mean, this thing is really precious, and the Brits have really damaged it. But if then, in addition, the Trump people start doing things to global trade patterns, we could be in a very prolonged economic downturn globally, which would threaten the whole stability of the global order. And if it does that, then, you know, just to be really miserable, the people who will suffer most are the very people who voted for Brexit and for Trump. And they will go find somebody worse, unless, you know, I mean, we face America that might become full of internment camps, and Muslim registers. I mean, we have the European Union might start to look very civilized again in the way it treats immigrants, depending on what goes on here. But in either regard, it is, as you finish your transatlantic masters, you are absolutely on the cutting edge of the interaction of this crucial struggle to maintain managed welfare capitalism and global trade patterns and decent immigration laws in a political universe that is now threatening all of them. You know? And I think your expertise will be critical to this. Your voice needs to be heard. And I think there's going to be an incredibly important role for public intellectuals in the public square arguing against this kind of neolithic, anti-expert, xenophobic, misogynistic, you know, this just goes on. Things that we're now having to deal with. Brexit was a beginning of this. Nigel Farage, fortunately, is not Donald Trump, but actually it's a very, very serious moment in our lives, and I wish I could come and say there was some easy way out. I don't see one. The whole logic of everything you look at tells you they should reverse this decision, and they should reverse it straight away. All the politics of it tells you they can't, and I think that's the contradiction that's being played out in Britain now, and it's deeply depressing.